Yeah, and if you didn't like the presentation, at least we brought some champagne, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
But if
so
you didn't like it, we'll take it with us.
yeah. All right, so my name is Oleg. That's Christos. We are PMs from Vivino, and we just want to attack that question.
That's usually the question that everybody asks me in all the previous events. After I'm done, that's the second most asked question I get. Actually, anyone that works for Vivino, that's the second most asked question. How do you guys make money? Because we talked a lot about process before. We talked a lot about what growth hacking is and some email automation. But the question that always comes up is how do we get money? So that's why I brought Oleg today to explain to you how we make money.
And we got so tired of hearing this question, we decided to build something finally that makes money, which is actually this.
Yes.
So we built an e-commerce platform on top of our user base where users can go and buy some wine. So we call it the market section, and the idea is pretty simple. You launch the app, you see some wines, then you add some things into your shopping cart, then you enter your credit card details, and then you get your wine delivered to your address. So that's what we call the e-commerce part of the app. But so some numbers to brag about. So we kind of built the biggest wine shop in the past year. So in the past year we got, so currently we have more than 500,000 wines in the inventory. So that makes us the biggest wine shop in the world. And we have more than 100,000 wines sold last year. And the last thing that we're going to be brag about is that, so this is the growth of year over year. So, but basically because we started from scratch, right?
No, we make money.
Yeah. So this is probably the most important slide out of everything that we have prepared. So this slide illustrates all the challenges that we have faced in the past year, which is that we have built a really nice tool. Vivino is well known. If you don't know Vivino, that's weird, but you should be.
Here.
But we have like 28 million users using Vivino in order to scan. So that's the primary feature of the app. People launch the app, people point at the wine bottle, and then they learn everything about wine, and then they contribute back to the community, and then we build something on top of that, right? So that you can explore wine and do some other stuff. And people love that. Like our NPS score is around 47 right now, which is like really, really high, right? Well, I mean, at least we assume that it is.
It's mostly because they rated well at drinking, but yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And it seems like we have found our market fit, right? So it seems like we have found the need that we need to address, and we have addressed it quite successfully. And then when we started building e-commerce on top of that, we kind of discovered that, yeah, you know what, like this whole idea about using Vivino as a tool, that's a completely different story compared to using Vivino as the e-commerce platform. Because one thing is that, you launch the app having a bottle in front of you, and another thing is that you need to remember to launch the app in order to buy wine. And like this whole change, this whole like trying to grab as much as possible from this huge user base and like introducing them to the e-commerce part of the app, that was really hard. And the hardest part is that, again, the actual value proposition is completely different. And we started from scratch, and we're still trying to, grab the more, the better out of that user base. And, remember this big number? Yeah, that's kind of nothing compared to this, right? So we are still at the beginning of the thing, even though, yeah, we kind of have built the biggest wine shop. So the thing that we want to talk about today is that neither I nor Christos has actually experienced in e-commerce. So we needed to build the e-commerce platform without having like touched none of the experience, having no experience building e-commerce products before. Christos comes from gaming.
Yeah, I always said I used to make video games.
And I come from B2B products. I've been doing some B2B stuff for like before it was like 5 years. So when we realized that we didn't have any e-commerce experience whatsoever, and now we need to build something on top of that, we were like, okay, well, what should we do, right? And so basically the next slides are going to be about that. And if there is only one thing that we want you to remember from this presentation, except that we'll have some wine, is this. So the biggest idea that we have from our experience so far is that the domain experience, this fancy people coming with nice, tuxedo and saying that they have a really cool experience in building e-commerce platforms, it's overrated. Because you can still build stuff just by using the traditional PM/growth hacking tools. And basically we want to just talk about the actual tools that we used.
Yep, our own process.
Yep, so the first tool is the MVP tool. We all know what it is, right? So building the minimum viable product. And it's not new at all, like everyone has used it while building products from scratch. And obviously, like the hardest thing about using MVP as a tool is trying to figure out which things to start with, right? Because you don't want to start by, just building a car like this with just one wheel, for instance. You want to start by, focusing on the smallest user experience possible that would still be, lovable or livable, right? So what did we start with? We started from the beginning of the e-commerce experience, which is the checkout. Makes sense, right? So the first thing that we introduced is the actual way for users to, when they see the wine, they can press the button, they can enter their, credit card information, and then they can enter the address and stuff, and then they can press the OK button. So the reason for that was that, obviously, we'll need the checkout eventually anyway. No e-commerce platform can be built without any checkout. Another thing is that this is kind of a minimum viable product, right? I mean, it can be used to order wine.
I can even attest how minimum it is because, in the beginning, even though you placed your order and you gave us your credit card details and all of these things, actually there was no automation. We literally had to read your order and go into the website of the merchant and type in your details and place the order on your behalf, right? So there was nothing automatic about it. We just literally took your money and then, hopefully you were going to get your wine, but trusting us that we are going to do the job of actually placing an order on your behalf.
And the funny part about that story is that actually that is how Vivino was built as well, because at the beginning of Vivino there was no automation behind, trying to figure out, the image recognition, what are the, the other wines that look like this. No, there were actual human beings looking at your scan and like actually Googling this wine and then sending it to you, right? So we're quite good at this, huh? All right. So we kind of started from the end of the e-commerce experience. We built this, and when we kind of realized that, so we see some, some purchases, and then we go to websites and then enter them themselves. But the only way people can actually find wine that they can buy is that when they scan, right? So you have a wine in front of you, you scan and you see the buy button, which is nice, but you have wine already, right? Doesn't really make sense. So that's why the second thing on top that we built was the Explore section. So the idea was quite simple. We have all the wines in our database that we know the prices about. Now we can try to group them by using some cool filters. Less cool, like red, white, sparkling, rosé and stuff. But more cool, like for instance, regional styles, because we know a lot about the wine domain. We can, figure out, for instance, you can also search by grape or stuff like that. And then you can see the wines that you can actually buy through Vivino. And all of them are sorted by average rating. So because we don't really sell wine directly, we use other merchants' inventory that we actually sell. And because we have so many merchants, we don't need to, try to create some bullshit around, some wines like it is common in the wine industry. We can actually say this is a good wine just because people like it.
Yep. One of the coolest things about running a marketplace is that actually you don't care what you sell, right? As long as you sell, and ideally you sell the best things. So you don't have the problem that merchants have, that they have a back inventory of crap wines that they need to sell, so they need to run discounts and try to promote them in any possible way. We make the same commission whether we sell this wine or that wine. So we can sell actually the best wine.
Yep. So this did allow us to get much more orders, and that makes perfect sense, right? Now you can actually find wine that is not standing in front of you. But you kind of need to be, a bit more, you kind of need to know a bit more about the wine domain and about your preferences as well, rather than the average Joe, right? Because you need to know about regional stuff. Like, I don't really know about Italian brawl. Well, I do, but let's imagine that, right? But I can't just even read this. I just recommend me something. That's why the next thing that we built on top was the recommendation system and the whole idea about us actually suggesting you some wines based on lots and lots of things. I'll talk about it on the next slide in a separate section. And that section was called the market section. And fast forward half a year, yeah, approximately, no, even more, like 9 months. This has become the biggest source of the purchases that we receive. So people actually like recommendations. They like having some wines and like choosing wines from the recommended ones rather than exploring themselves. Obviously, there are some geeks who are much more comfortable using the Explorer section, but this is the thing that is driving our e-commerce experience right now. And just some examples, what we showed in the market section in the beginning was that, we suggested some wines based on their popularity. So we looked at all the wines that some other users scanned, and we looked at how they rated it, and then we just showed those wines as a top charts in your state or your country. And that's actually one of the most interesting ones. We actually analyzed your taste profile, meaning that if you know that you like some specific wine style, even without you realizing that you're into wine style, but just because you rated it highly, and for instance, that's mine, right? I love German Riesling. And I love this band because I always find some really cool wine from this band. And I didn't even realize that, especially before I started Vivino, I didn't realize that, there is some, well, first of all, I knew about Riesling, but I didn't know about the differences, that the wine domain has between German Riesling, Austrian Riesling, Australian Riesling, and whatnot, right? Now, because the app can actually analyze that, it can recommend me wines that I'm more likely to buy. Or, for instance, wines that I tried before. Right, so the worth tasting again band with wines that present all the wines that I tried before that I liked, and now you can actually buy it through the app. Want to add something?
No.
No. Okay.
But since that's the way people actually like placing their orders for wine, we keep working on it. That's part of the MVP. So we try to figure different ways that people actually end up placing the orders, and once we found it, we just kept iterating and iterating it. So I think it's been more than 6 months now that primarily all the iterations have been around this part of the app. Exactly. Yeah.
Funny story about this part of the app. When we launched it, you could open the wine page, then you would see the buy button, the one that we saw before. Then you would try to proceed with this buy button, and then you go directly into the checkout flow. So there is no way to actually add several wines into your purchase. And that's how we launched the market section. So the next part of the MVP was to actually allow users to buy more than one wine.
Yeah, something called the cart. I mean, we didn't know about e-commerce, but then someone told us about this cart functionality. So we said, we probably need that, right?
And on a serious note, the reason for that was that, obviously people would love to add several wines into their wine purchase. That makes so much sense, right? But we didn't want to build the whole e-commerce trying to attack the shopping cart, the market section, the Explorer section, blah, 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 right? So that's why we said, all right, let's build the market section. Let's focus on those users who would just go directly to checkout with this wine. Yes, some of them are the other subgroup of users, they are not going to be happy. Yes, but we'll build something else that they'll use later on. But we've already learned so much from the other guys. And that's what we built, right? So we built the way for users to actually add to cart, and finally they can order more than one wine. Just some illustrations how it looked like.
At the time.
Yeah, exactly. Some illustrations how it looked like. So once you add something to your cart, you see the nice screen, and then there is the whole concept of having several carts. Just because we have several merchants, so we can't really combine wine purchases together. So it was quite a challenge how to build it.
It's a little difficult to explain. You have to drink first, and I'll explain to you.
But speaking of challenges, because none of us actually have any e-commerce experience. When we're faced with those kind of things, like, okay, how should we present this screen or not, right? What exactly should we be presenting on the screen? Or like, should we somehow have all the shopping carts combined, and then later on, when you go into checkout, you would realize that you are actually ordering from 5 different merchants, and you would need to pay $50. So like those kind of questions, when they came up, we spent so much time, arguing about it. And then once we couldn't figure out, neither of us have any experience. That's why, another tool that we used, the A/B testing, and we loved it. So like, for instance, right, just one particular example of the A/B test that we run, and we have run like, I would say like close to 100 different A/B tests, even more, I guess. So like one example is that, for instance, when you choose a wine, you press the Add to Cart button, right? Should we say, hey, there are some other wines from the same merchant? That would make sense because you can actually combine those together into one purchase. Or should we allow you to browse the market section and you stay on the same wine, go back, because that's where you actually came from, right? And we had some heated debates about this, and each approach has some upsides and downsides, and we didn't know what to do. So we built both, and we just decided to show this screen to half of the users and not show anything, and allow them to go back to the market section and choose another wine for the other half of the users. And then, for instance, like when you are actually presented, when you press the button, you see a pop-up, right? What should it say? Like, should we just say add to cart, and that's the only primary action that you have? Should it say buy it now, for instance, so that you can actually proceed directly to checkout? Maybe it's awesome to have a shortcut for you to proceed with the one that you like. And we also had like so much debates about that we decided just to build it and test it. And 2 months, fast forward 2 months, the winner out of this combination, for instance, was the variant where we had both the upselling screen, but for users who did want to proceed with that particular wine, we actually showed this particular one. The difference in the conversion rate was, so that one was 8% versus the worst one that received around 5%. So the difference was quite big. But we couldn't actually learn that beforehand before actually building it. And we, like everything that you see on the market section, most of the things are actually built from those A/B tests. Like we decided to try something out, and then when we tried it, we iterated on it and we learned from it. And then we actually needed to discard some of the things that we have built, unfortunately, just because it didn't perform well. But at least we increased the conversion rate. And like when we launched the market section, it was a mild success because, like, obviously people still needed to get used to the whole idea about buying wine online, and it's still a challenge, right? But we also noticed that there is a huge problem that led us to creating Market 2.0. And the whole idea and the whole problem that we started with was actually this number. So this number is the interaction rate that we saw on the market section. What that means is that 4% of our users who launched the app in order to scan, and people mostly do that, they proceeded to scanning, which is fine. Well, like, we liked it. We still enjoy, this whole tool part of the app, and we have worked on, actually making it better for the past year as well. But when they go back to the market section and they scroll the market section, so they, show some interest in it, at least the initial interest in the market section, only 4% of those users actually opened at least one wine. So that means that we build a market section that presents some interest for some users, but only this amount of users actually are interested enough in opening at least one wine. The rest of the funnel actually looked really good. And it still looks really good. The conversions that we see later on in the game, right after the launch, the first wine, the conversions to add into the shopping cart and blah 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 are actually really, really good. And we have also increased it, but it works really well. The challenge was to drive those users to at least experience one wine from the market section. So that's when we started brainstorming, we came up with a whole bunch of ideas. But the overall, the overall process around it was pretty simple. We tried to look at the market section and tried to come up with underlying assumptions that we used when we built it and tried to question it. So that was the first, process. And the second process, we tried to, we also asked the users who didn't actually purchase or who didn't open the market section, and we tried to source all the possible, explanations for it, why was it happening. And the third one is that we just brought some people and we showed them the market section, and we tried to get, some ideas around how they interacted with it. And so this is basically the result of all those assumptions that we collected. Like, for instance, let's take the first one, the supercards. So when we built the market section, the underlying assumption, the biggest one and the most important one was that Netflix style, right?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah,
Just need to hurry up.
Yeah, okay. It's important to show you the wines, and the more wines, the merrier, right? But then we realized that maybe, and that's what we saw, people get lost in those wines. So maybe it makes sense to just focus on one particular wine, just because we know that this is the best one, right? If you don't have like 5 minutes browsing through the market section, trying to choose, okay, so what was the difference between German Riesling and Australian Riesling? We know that this is the one that you like just because you like Spanish Red because you like Spanish Red, right? Sorry, it's copy-pasted from one of the designs. Not the actual screenshot, no. So like this particular A/B test showed us that there is a 60% increase in the conversion rate. We managed to drive more people into actually placing orders just by focusing on one specific wines. It doesn't mean that we hid the rest of the wines. No, we're still in the market section. It's just, we tried to figure out what are the ones that you are more interested in, and we just showed that one. And the rest of the things, they're also built around this. We weren't sure what was the problem with the market section. We brainstormed, we gathered as much information as possible, and then we decided to just build the simplest thing possible just to test this underlying assumption. And if it showed the success, like for instance this one, we started iterating on top of that. So for instance, these super cards that we introduced, now we'll be introducing more and more later on, once you start scrolling the market section. And now we started introducing it even in the rest of the app. Like for instance, when you're in the Explore tab, we show you the wines in this way. And like all these things combined, and like this iterative process allowed us to increase the conversion rate in the market section 3 times. So just by, not trusting our underlying assumptions, questioning a bunch of them, but just building some, simple tests. And that's basically the process that we used. And that's, even though, repeating myself 4 times in a row, even though we didn't have any experience whatsoever, just by having this process, it allowed us already to, to increase the conversion rates, to increase the retention rates, and, obviously increase sales. And, basically 2 tools that we used combined together were the, MVP tool that allowed us to actually build the e-commerce thing from scratch, even though it sounds really hard. And the A/B tests that we also run all over the place in the market section and the Explorer section.
Lots of them.
Yep. So
that's it.
That's basically it.
We're out.